Hello everyone. In this alternate history scenario, I will imagine a timeline where Jesus was born exhibiting the physical characteristics of both sexes and based off both this and their own personal choices, decided to identify themselves personally and professionally as gender fluid, presenting themselves as alternately non-binary, male and female, and represented his gender identity through clothes, language, voice pitch and their pronouns. This alternate history was inspired by other alternate history content I have seen, which I will link below, examining a scenario with a female Jesus, who the people in the thread colloquially refer to as a Jesus. I will examine interesting ways that this change in the gender of Jesus would affect Christianity. I'd like to preemptively say that no offence is meant to non-binary folk, and any errors are due caused by ignorance rather than malice. Firstly, could this even happen in the first place? Indeed, this could. Babies are born this way not too infrequently, with modern estimates saying that this occurs in 0.002 or 0.005% of cases. Well, obviously somewhere between there. In a global sense, every 20,000th to 50,000th baby is born this way. This is not even all over the world. There are some areas where it's as common as 20% of babies are born exhibiting characteristics of both sexes. So this is not commonly talked about because historically we've got an idea, well, historically many people have gotten this idea that there are only two genders, or only two ways that gender is expressed, or only two ways that sex is expressed in babies, and institutions like the medical establishment and society as a whole, historically and in many ways currently, like to put people in boxes. And when people don't fit, they are mutilated to fit and swept under the rug. I'll link below to a study which shows how this has happened in the past. So, how would this baby be interpreted by Jewish society at the time? The short answer to this question is we don't know. The first reference to androgyny occurs in our timeline about 300 to 500 years after Jesus was born in Jewish society, in the Genesis Rabbah, which is an ancient Jewish text. This book claimed that Adam, the first human ever, was androgynous, and the removal of their rib bone is what made them a him, or a he, and Eve a her, after she grew out of the rib bone. And they interpreted how these non-binary people should be, who they call different names like tum-tum and androgynous, differently from sect to sect, with the main branch seeming to decide not to decide, and treat them varyingly as male, female, neither, and both, which often meant that they were on the hook for both male and female traditions and ceremonies. In a timeline with a non-binary Jesus, to create interest in this topic, ideas such as this would be in a timeline with a gender-fluid Jesus, who was often non-binary. To create interest in this topic, ideas like this would be explored much earlier than they would be in our timeline, than they were in our timeline. And it's likely that this kind of debate would occur much earlier. So how would this affect Jesus' life? I think that if you're looking at this scenario through a Christian lens, if you believe that this demigod was placed on earth by God for the specific reason of redeeming humanity, then neither hell nor high water would stand in their way. They'd spread parables of right moral action and spreading the messages of radical love and forgiveness to anyone who would listen. And they'd find a way of spreading the word of God. Through another lens, like a religious or atheist bent, a charismatic person like Jesus, who in our timeline was able to convince so many people to follow, listen and believe in him when he said he was the Son of God, would find it comparatively easy to represent and be taken seriously as a different gender. It seems like a small stretch. If people believe that you're the Son of God, it should be comparatively easy to say you're a different gender, which seems a fair bit more down to earth. So in this timeline, the non-binary nature of Jesus might be seen as the blend of male and female, because she was non-binary. So this could be seen as a representation of God's true nature as being both or neither, with a love for humanity which is all-encompassing and equal. And as the living embodiment of the reunification of man and woman, who were first separated when Eve grew out of Adam's rib bone, being represented by Jesus. This could lead to religious theories, spin-off religions, and cultural traditions radically different to the Christianity which exists in our timeline. So this idea of a beginning point with Adam and Eve splitting off from each other and becoming male and female, and another point on the timeline where Jesus arrives to symbolically and perhaps literally reunite them, then there may be a circular view of time where you'd go from here, where there'd be two genders, to a point where they'd be reunited. The two genders breakup is associated with beginning of people being cast out of the shadow, out of the Garden of Eden, and the reuniting of them within Adam's form could be seen as the reuniting of them, and maybe beginning again a cycle of living in the Garden of Eden. There could be a symbolic timber, metallic, or even real ribbon given during marriage ceremonies to celebrate the uniting of two incomplete halves of a species into a complete person, as symbolized by a male and female, getting married, or perhaps later on down the line there could be ideas of same-sex couples being, or same-gender couples, being culturally different, so that they could get married in that way. The adaptation of traditions to blend pagan, animist, and Norse mythology and culture with Christianity may result in more symbolic traditions, particularly in relation to the ways animals and political institutions are interpreted. Gods who have changeable qualities and genders, such as Loki, may well be co-opted into saints in this timeline, as they were in ours. Not Loki, obviously, but gods and ideas, such as Easter and Christmas. Animals which aren't gods but are cultural traditions. Animals which have the ability to change sex or have hermaphroditic qualities based on the circumstances around them, such as certain species of frogs and fish, would be seen as being more holy and connected with God than they are in our timeline. An image of crucifixes depicting the upper body and groin of Jesus may be more covered or more exposed, or there could be exaggerated proportions for them based on various scenes from the Bible, reflecting the tastes and biases of the artist and culture at the time. Political institutions in our timeline, such as monarchical institutions, always connect themselves to the nation's dominant religion and use it to enhance their legitimacy. This is seen with ideas like the divine right of kings and the mandate of heaven appearing independent of each other in Europe and China. In a timeline where femininity and androgyny are desirable qualities in leaders which reveal holiness, political and military leaders would counsel and involve women in more discussions, and cultural norms which encourage the predation and subjugation of women would be less apparent in this timeline. Being told that you think like a girl, or thinking without the lens of gender would be seen as desirable qualities, perhaps, in this timeline. So societies in this timeline with strict gender norms would receive more criticism from Christian and Jewish scholars, which followed this Jesus. Perhaps not Jewish scholars, obviously, for the division of a universal us on the gender spectrum into two separate and unequal spaces. There would be less interest in the strict gender roles found in Greek and Roman culture, with their use of the idealized and distinct male and female forms in statues, and the copying of their philosophical and political systems, and more interested in other cultures prevalent at the times, mythology, politics, and philosophy. This may have significant benefits to many Jewish people, because to some degree anti-Semitism among wealthy people can be traced back to the cultural attitudes of the ancient Greeks as well. I'll link this into the description. So in a timeline where Greek culture and philosophy may have a more bitter taste because of their association with strict gender roles, anti-Semitism may well be less intellectualized, and Jews may have better relationships with Christians and in Europe and the Middle East in this timeline. I think democracy would still be adopted in a similar or an analogous way, in the same way as in our timeline, because it was not an entirely Greek invention, with pagan, Indian, and Norse peoples around this time using similar ideas. Again, I'll link to this below, but you could look it up on Wikipedia. People were identified, trained, or posed as non-binary, or possessed hermaphroditic qualities, would be seen as having a special connection or insight into God's or Jesus' ways and thought processes, and who could interpret religious texts in a more accurate way. With a more flexible idea of gender, gendered religious garb and Abrahamic faiths, such as the veil and the clothing of religious leaders, may be less segregated. Additionally, gender norms would be fuzzier around the edges, and people would be freer to live and act how they liked within that looser construct. Other outcomes of this timeline would be the acceptance of children born with unconventional or unconventional genitals or physical characteristics. In our timeline, these babies were and often continue to be genitally mutilated to fit them within a category by doctors without the parent or the child's knowledge or consent. However, in this timeline, a cultural attitude towards honouring divergence, change, and androgyny would make such actions be regarded as either Stone Age barbarism or blasphemy. Interesting to think about the degree to which our society today is ordered by the cultural legacy of religion. Our modern understandings about the nature of gender, time, how marriages should be conducted, and political culture were influenced by the way Settlement over 2 millennia ago acted. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you soonish for a less earth-changing divergence. Maybe it's something a bit more light-hearted. But this is pretty light-hearted.